Coogs House. The Houston Cougars are in the Big 12 in less than 1 month. And Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark spoke on that and a lot of other interesting things last Friday. Lots of stuff to break down on that one.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who came to step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way we get the latest on the Cougs into your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's good to see you again as we see you every day here at Locked On Cougs. I remember hit subscribe and like down below. Remember, we're giving a giveaway every 250 subscribers. At 1250, we're giving away one of those Locked On paw. It's got the paw on the front, Locked On the sides, the Nike Dry Fit hat, giving someone at 1250. So subscribe. So we get there. We're almost there. We're over 1240 as of the time of this recording. And make sure you comment and like so we know you are entering yourself in the contest. If after today's episode you have nothing else to say about the Big 12, or you're just ready to get in and don't have anything else to say about that, tell us if you cut your grilled cheese and your PB&J sandwiches in the same fashion. All right, so today's episode, we're going to talk some about Brett Yormark first, talk more generally and broadly about his commentary on the conference. He had some interesting things to say at a availability on Friday after spring meetings. Second segment's going to be all about how those things tie into Houston. So if that's too broad for you, trust me, just stay tuned to the second segment. Talk about how those things tie into Houston. And then the third segment, I got some stuff that he also said that doesn't directly tie to Houston quite as much, but I do think is worth jotting down and remembering. So let's start with the first. What did Brett Yormark say on Friday? So Friday, after wrapping up meetings of presidents and ADs from the Big 12 institutions for their spring meetings, right? They'll do sort of football media availability meetings in July. I'll be there, so I'll be able to talk to you more about that from up close and in person. But after talking about stuff with the ADs and presidents at these spring meetings, he had media availability to kind of talk through what kinds of things they had just talked through. First things first, I think the monkey in, was it elephant in the room or the monkey on his back or whatever, was all about expansion talk. And he opened up by saying that he was not going to talk about expansion talk, and then proceeded to talk about expansion talk. Said that all 12 of the future Big 12 schools, so leaving out Texas and Oklahoma, have been involved in meetings about expansion. And the philosophy has been unchanged, frankly, since adding Houston, that the conference wants to go coast to coast. He wouldn't mention any official names or schools. Obviously, you can't mention them until they opt out of their current deals, and that would be kind of wishy-washy and iffy. He answered some questions, though, about like partial membership, and he mentioned, Brett Yormark mentioned that they're looking at all options. I mean, they'll look at, do some schools like Gonzaga come in even though they don't have a football team, right? Does UConn, who has Big East ties and an independent football team, come in and leave their football team out? Do they bolster, put more investment in their football team and bring their football team in, right? All of those things I think are still on the table as of when he talked to media on Friday. And as if you listen to this on Monday, he maintains, though, which is important to both UConn and Gonzaga, maybe not to Arizona and Colorado and Utah and Arizona State and other schools that are also mentioned, but I guess Arizona has a strong program too. But Brett Yormark thinks basketball is the big undervalued thing at the present tense in college athletics, and that by the time that 2030 deal comes around, like 2030, 31, doing the whole TV deals all over again, you could very well see a heavy investment in a basketball-only TV deal and a football-only TV deal and keep them separate, because basketball, exponential growth in the tournament and all those kinds of things, and also just it's a different demographic, different market, appeals internationally and so on. And so he's looking at that as an undervalued or a market that they can take advantage of. I thought it was interesting that Texas Tech's president, I'm going to butcher this name because I don't know the Texas Tech president's name, but President Chovanec mentioned, and he was sitting there next to Yormark, that the ADs and presidents and Yormark were all kind of in lockstep on these kinds of ideas, that like the Big 12 is a strong basketball conference and that is undervalued. across the nation currently and could be worth a lot more soon, and where that will go one day. I think it's interesting looking at expansion in Colorado that obviously while Brett Yormark did not mention anyone in particular, that they are maintaining this hard line, like we are going to expand into other time zones and keep on working coast to coast. And Colorado continues to maintain. We've heard just as recently as last week that Deion Sanders wants to get into Texas, right? And that Colorado is not committing themselves to a Pac-12 deal until it's out there. The second thing that stuck out from Brett Yormark's comments, I think, really drives that home. The 10 Big 12 schools from last school year, 2022-23, took home a combined $440 million from the Big 12 alone. That's $44 million each. Now, that's not just TV deals. That's bowl money distributions, NCAA tournament units, and big New Year's Eve bowl games. All those kinds of things tie in. But $440 million together, or $44 million a piece, is a lot of money. And frankly, that's on last year's TV deal, right? Now, Houston, as a entering member, and next year and the year after, will only be eligible for half of that because technically they're entering in 25, they're getting in a year early, and right? But even half of the $44 million from last season, and they're going to be more than that, right? Because the TV dollar is going up to 31, but even half of 44 is 22. And last year, Houston got just over 8 for being in the American Athletic Conference. We're talking about nearly tripling that. I digress. Talk more about Houston in a second. But that $44 million is very clearly a number that Brett Yormark wanted out there. He said $440 and $44 million several different times in the course of the interview, or the media availability, I should say, on Friday. And I think that's intentional, and it's got to be intentional because that's so high, I don't think the Pac-12 can match it, right? He's making it known that, listen, the Big 12 is going to have more cash. It's just going to. And so the Pac-12 now has to scramble without a TV deal to speak of to find some way to get to close to $44 million per school. And they're not going to get there, folks. If they were anywhere close, we'd have heard about it by now. They're not going to get there. He also talked about, these potential, talking about revenue building, Mexico games, more information that could be coming as soon as this week. So keep your eyes and ears tuned to that. But on the whole, these two things, and there'll be more at the end, I guess, too, but these two things, the conference is willing to and open to and openly talking about continuing to expand past the 12 teams. And the school is in those 12 teams are they can talk about getting $44 or more million as this thing continues to grow when you factor in conference accomplishments. That's a tremendous news day for the Big 12 and all schools involved, including Houston. Now, in the third segment, I want to talk some about, in the second segment, I talk some about how those things tie into Houston. In the third segment, I'll talk some about what else he talked about. But first, let's talk about FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and it is the NBA Finals. That means it's time to make a fast break to FanDuel, because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. I'm looking at these NBA Finals. As you're listening to this, it is currently 1-1. That is big time. I'm looking at this. They got the Heat still at plus 210 to win the whole thing. They only need to win 3 games. They got 3 games in Miami. That feels like fun money. The other thing about this I'll point out, too, is that Jimmy Butler on the Heat would be at plus 430 to win a Finals MVP. I'm thinking the better value might be Bam Adebayo at plus 650. Bam has to cover Jokic. Bam has to do a lot of facilitating. And frankly, I commented on Twitter several times, I thought Bam was the difference maker in Game 2, not because of any scoring, but because of how much he set up the offense as a creator. At plus 650, I think that's really good money. And I'm telling you, it's all really good money at FanDuel, because if you use FanDuel.com/locked on, you can get a no sweat first bet of $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. So a couple other news and notes will come later in the episode about what he had to say. But the first thing I'm going to point out here is that Houston's about to have an influx in cash flow, right? The American Athletic Conference is giving just over $8 million, and then as a baseline for TV revenue type deals out to schools, right? Then we factor in like an occasional, I guess, while Houston was in the conference, Central Florida and Cincinnati both went to big-time bowl games, Cincinnati getting the college football playoff, right? I don't think Memphis or Houston did, but those would be the four. So, right, theoretically, you get one a year, right? And then big bowls, I guess, I'm going to lump into that, kind of the same crew. Also, for what it's worth, you get money for units or teams make an NCAA tournament, right? So Houston makes a tournament, the conference gets a bunch of money to divide amongst the schools. This year, Houston and Memphis both did. 1 year in the last couple, Houston and UCF both did. But you catch my drift, right? You're looking there at like all put together in a given year, a little over $9 million. Once you put it all together, $1 million per school. Houston moving into the Big 12 doesn't just mean you get to play better competition and put on display why they should be in bigger bowl games, right? Or prepare them more for the NCAA tournament because you play this kind of competition on a more daily basis. Playing against this competition also means you're going to get better appreciated results that will lead to making more money, right? Playing in the same conference as several teams that are poised to make the college football playoff means that you're more likely to get one in that college football playoff. And then, especially with the college football playoff expanding, you're more likely to get some kickbacks as a member of the conference. Same thing with New Year's Six games and the deals on those. Same thing with NCAA tournament teams, right? The Big 12 is a notoriously strong basketball conference. Well, if you put Houston into that as well, that's pulling one team out of the AAC, put them into the Big 12, adding another team into the NCAA tournament. And suddenly it's another set of units that will be involved in getting money and kickbacks from having all these teams in the tournament, because the NCAA gives money to conferences via their own TV deals for having teams in these big-time events. Being in the Big 12 means more of your compadres are in those, meaning more of the schools get more money. So not just is Houston putting themselves in this from a competitive perspective to move themselves up in the world, but they're also going to continue to make more money from playing those teams that are in that upper echelon of competition at the end of each season, right? We know the TV deal is going to be astronomically higher. Again, you're looking for $8 million a year to looking at more like 31.7, and who knows what 2030 deal is going to look like, right? But also, you're now looking at adding 12 and 15 million a year and just other schools doing well. Houston couldn't ask for more in that from a cash front, right? It also worth pointing out that the expansion aspect of this will add more teams to that pile. So if I don't think Deion Sanders is at Colorado very long, but say he's there for a couple of years and they make it to a 12-team college football playoff, right? That helps Houston out. Houston gets a couple $1 million out of that, right? That's a good kickback. That's a good deal. It also, and the interesting thing about expansion in terms of Brett Yormark being open to it, means that you're expanding the market and reach of the Houston brand, so much so that you're looking at more recruiting bases. So if you can get into Arizona, can you get into Southern California for recruiting kids? Right? Hey, Arizona and Phoenix is 4 hours from LA, right? Like, talk to me. If you get UConn, can you talk to those New Yorkers about coming down and playing basketball? Hey, we're going to play a game every third year in Madison Square Garden. Come on down, boss. Right? Like those kinds of things. All of a sudden, if you're looking at the expanded footprint of the conference, that's also going to be the expanded footprint of Houston, right? But I think the biggest thing that Yormark said that interests me as a Houston person is not, obviously football is king in Texas, and I don't mean to say that it's not, but Yormark's constant appreciation and push for basketball. Houston is a basketball brand. It's a basketball brand that matters. 6 Final Fours, right? Sweet 16 every year since 2019. They've got a Hall of Fame coach. Jordan Brand picked Houston men's basketball and women's basketball for a reason, right? There was not like just a random drawing of a hat. Houston is a basketball brand. From Phi Slamma Jamma and the cultural relevance of that, the game of the century earlier than that even, right? Like, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar lost 2 college games his entire college career. One of them was to Houston in the Astrodome on a nationally televised game in front of hundreds of thousands of people, right? Like, That's a big stinking deal. And that happened in Houston basketball. Houston, for what it's worth, is a very specific basketball market. It's got a very well-known pro team that's well-known internationally as well, for that's what that's worth. Tillman Fertitta has got his hand in Houston Cougars and his hand in those Houston Rockets. Don't think that that's not going back and forth some there too, right? Houston basketball is important, and we talk about them all basketball season long and fairly frequently throughout the offseason here. But Houston basketball being important is important because Yormark also thinks that's important. And I bet because of the semblance there, the combination there, you see Houston get elevated some throughout this. This is me reading between the lines. I don't have anyone saying, I heard Brett Yormark. But I'm even as simple as like the leaking, just Duarte was the first one to leak it, but about these Mexico games that they're doing in Big 12 basketball. They're pairing up Houston. They were, understandably, it sounds like, per Duarte, they're going to pair up Houston to play Kansas in Mexico City. They're trying to grow the game in this next door neighbor, other country that, basketball is a big deal, but not as big as like soccer or anything, right? And they're going to hand them blue blood Kansas and Houston. That's not for nothing. That shouldn't get lost. Houston's basketball influence is palpable. It's intentional. It's a reason that if Brett Yormark values the basketball dollar, that he'd pull in the University of Houston. For what it's worth on the Mexico games, I think it's also worth pointing out that Houston obviously is a big public university in a neighboring state to Mexico. Houston's about 10% of national students. Roughly a third identify as Hispanic or Latino. And so, like, you're seeing a lot of crossover there as far as, like, cultural relevancy between the school and Mexico games as well. I think it's a really, really good deal for Houston. As those details come out potentially this week, I think they're going to all be favorable for Houston. I'm excited about that one, right? But Houston's a big marketing brand here in the basketball world. And if Brett Yormark values basketball, he'll continue to value Houston at a high level as long as Sampson and company are here running the whole show. For what it's worth, it was big-time basketball under Guy Lewis too, and it's had moments in between there, but I think that's important. Also, we get to see this whole thing kick off just in like how they're opening Big 12 play. In week 3, which is before most conferences are playing conference games, Houston gets to play TCU at 7 o'clock on national television. The first national cable game, not streaming game, that Houston has had in primetime since playing Cincinnati in the 2021 American Athletic Conference Championship game, right? That's important. They're kicking off this Big 12 with Houston playing a team that was in the college football national championship game. That's not for nothing either, folks. So, that game needs to be raucous and loud and chaotic and crazy and tailgate all day and enjoy the day and enjoy the game and enjoy the Cougar win. That's a fun one to go cheer on. But that's all important to take note of here, is that the things Brett Yormark is saying he values are the things that Houston's going to continue to be good at. Markets, basketball, right? Cultural diversity as far as within the school, and also like where you are geographically. Those things all matter, and they all matter to Houston as well. Now, in the third segment, I want to talk some about other things he said that tie into this conference and how, we may hit them, how they hit Houston a little bit as we go, but these are kind of more broad swath segment or big, like broad strokes kind of things. So let's get into it a little bit. First, it should be pointed out that Brett Yormark, and this may not be everyone's favorite thing, but he also thinks of this as being his turn to lead the conference, to be kind of at the front of gambling in college sports. Now, I think that's mostly because gambling in all sports is on the rise, right? It's being legalized in many more states than it was even just a couple of years ago. But the big deal here is after what just happened in Alabama, right, where you saw a college baseball coach make a phone call to a guy, may have been a bookie, at a casino, and then shortly thereafter, that bookie then places giant bets on Alabama to lose. Within 10 minutes, Alabama is scratching their starting pitcher, right? Because of those kinds of moments, and then you look at the NFL, like the Lions thing, and or what happened to the wide receivers a year ago, Cam Ridley, right? when you look at these gambling things happening across sports, Brett Yormark talked about like educating college athletes on what can and can't happen, what you can and can't be involved in, where you can and can't be, the education piece of this. And regardless of what you think about gambling coming into sports more and more by the year, you have to appreciate the education piece here because it is coming whether we like it or not. But educating the kids keeps them out of harm's way with it in a way that I really, really appreciate. Now, for what it's worth, in the state of Texas, I bet Texas is the 50th state because these things passed, right? Ken Paxton seems to be fairly slow and conservative on changing things like that. And I don't think that things will change while he's in office. And so I don't know if this ever is a direct problem for people on campus with Houston, but like if you're playing, those out-of-town games in Ohio or those, I guess Cincinnati's technically in Kentucky, kind of, or Florida, or, if we get to play in Madison Square Garden, New York, like kids have phones, right? So while it might not be happening here in Texas, that's gonna be really, really important. Something I appreciate as a guy that likes branding. Brett Yormark said that he didn't want to change anything about the brand. It's still going to be called the Big 12. They may change the logo or the coloring of the logo or something like that to kind of signify a change once Texas and Oklahoma leave. But they're not going to change the logo. They're not going to call themselves the Big 20 or the Big 14 or the Big whatever based on how many schools are in the conference. But they are looking to like have a more like worldwide appeal. Brett Yormark said words like hipper and younger. They want to kind of get more in tune with a younger audience. I imagine you see, because of what's been successful for other conferences and was successful across pro sports with Brett Yormark's pro sports background, something more like a shield, right? Something more like a shield. I also thought it was interesting in the same hipper and younger vibe that Yormark wants to be known as the innovative and forward-thinking conference. That's when you add things like being mic'd up on the sidelines and in games, or expanding media access to coaches and players, kind of the pre-COVID pro sports, that kind of level of access. That's the kind of stuff it sounds like Brett Yormark wants to get to, where you have more access to the locker room, more access post-game, more access pre-game, more access during the game, all those kinds of things. And, you could argue that it's not great for players, you could argue that it's invasive and those kind of things, but as fans, as people trying to take this product in and cheer on our team, getting the most information or getting the most up-close look or just getting to know the kids playing the most all strikes me as really, really good things. Now, that's this big Spark Notes version and just a little over 20 minutes about what happened on Friday. There will be more this week on Mexico and the Big 12's games being played there, apparently. And then there's definitely going to be more at football media days. And I guess that's July 12th and 13th. July 12th and 13th, I will be there. Those are going to be, I believe, at Cowboy Stadium in Arlington, Texas. I will be there reporting. I'll probably do some the short YouTube shorts and TikToks and stuff like that, and then record that night after. But that'll be a fun time in July. All kinds of fun around the Big 12. There'll be new marketing stuff as early as July 1st. Make sure you're tuned into socials for all of that. Speaking of socials, make sure you follow me at Painsworth512. That's PAINSWRTH 512 on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, our Facebook social media handles. Be happy to talk all things Houston Cougars, football, basketball. The baseball season ended early, but it was a heck of a baseball season. Moving to the Big 12, Rockets, Astros, Texans, whatever, all things at Painsworth512. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.